Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for High Velocity Radio.
Welcome to the High Velocity Radio Show, where we celebrate top performers producing better results in less time. Stone Payton here with you this afternoon. You guys are in for a real treat. Please join me in welcoming to the broadcast CEO and President with HireQuest, Inc., Mr. Rick Hermanns. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I am doing well. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. And maybe a great place to start would be if you could share with me and our listeners mission, purpose. What are you and your organization really out there trying to do for folks, man?
So I really appreciate that question. We're in the staffing industry. However, we are a franchisor. And so really one of the greatest honors of my career has been to help facilitate the creation of probably 50 to 60 millionaires over time. And so it's been just a great part of my career is, again, helping. I didn't make them a millionaire, but we certainly helped them through our system become one. And so, as a franchisor, we're there to support our franchisees. And again, so I'm very happy with that.
Well, it sounds like great work if you can get it. Noble, true, and this has to be rewarding. What's your backstory, man? How in the world did you get into this line of work and now being able to do this?
Well, in some respects, I got into it by mistake. I had, when I had finished grad school, I went to work for a bank, and one of my clients was a staffing company, and I went there to be their CFO, and I hadn't been there 3-4 months and a recession hit and they were having big financial problems. And, basically I ended up being told, well, your choice is either, collect unemployment or become a franchisee of ours. And so I became a franchisee of theirs, built the business up in a few years. And then ultimately, it's a long story, but they ended up buying back a bunch of my offices. And then I went public and became a franchisor myself. So it really wasn't by design. It was more just capitalizing on opportunities that came along the way.
That initial transition, becoming a franchisee, and now you're running your own business. I mean, was that a little bit intimidating or scary at all in the early going?
Well, it's definitely something that I had really no intention of doing. I know some people, they're 10 years old and they're thinking about running 48 lemonade stands or whatever. And that really wasn't what I was looking for at all. And I remember, my office was in a very, very suspect portion of Miami. And there was rioting going on. And I was only like 5 years out of grad school. And I'm thinking to myself, what in the world am I doing here? And about 5 months after that, Hurricane Andrew hit, and it was just, and it all changed. And so, it was really it was a bit scary to begin with. And then, but within about a year, what I realized is all of a sudden, gosh, it's nice that if I'm going to work next weekend, I'm going to work, 12-hour days, the beneficiary is basically going to be me, not some other company. And so it didn't take too long. And sort of, it's like, what I could, and anybody who knows me would sit there and say, yeah, this guy doesn't listen to people well enough to be a good employee. So it's worked out great. I really have just never looked back.
Well, and I have to believe in your current role, you have what my daughter would call the ultimate street cred, right? You've been there. You've been a franchisee. You're not just the old guy that used to know how it was done, right?
No, that's and that's I mean, obviously it's probably not the topic, the primary topic we're, discussing today, but I believe that is an absolutely, I don't know how companies hire people who don't have sort of granular experience in their industry. I think I know some people pull it off, but generally speaking, it's extremely difficult. I was reading an article, man, about 8 months ago, and it was talking about a large airplane manufacturer and just saying how the board and the senior management really had, none of them were engineers that knew how to build planes and never had been out on the floor, so to speak. And it's like, I don't know I just don't know how you run a company without understanding the ins and outs. And it has served me countless times over the last 34 years where it's like, hey, you can't blow a fastball by me because I know what it takes to do that.
So being
And
in the staffing industry, in a leadership role like your organization is, and like you are personally, you've got to have your fingers on the pulse of workforce trends. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening, particularly now in the in the workplace. Yeah, get us caught up on what's going on.
so, there is um, we're in a very strange economy and really have been if you think about it, 2019 was a year of, I would say was probably the gold standard as far as economic growth, at least as it related to employment, because we were still in a non-inflationary environment, and yet real wages were going up. And which is again a Goldilocks period if you're an employee, right? Your services are in demand, and yet it's not like you're just giving it away on the backside by having raising price,
Yeah.
rising prices. Then you hit of course, the pandemic. You have a massive shift of people going from in office to working remote. I mean, literally, it went from about 11% of the population working, or the workforce working remote, to upwards to 45% working remote in the space of a month. That changed that way. So you had all those dislocations, and then you had massive amounts of government money being paid for people to be idle, and so then all of a sudden you had this sharp, increase in need. And yet you had a lot of employees that it made no economic sense for them to go back to work. And so you had, again, workforce shortages. And 22, and, especially 2022, after that government, direct payments to workers ran out, then you had this massive run up. And yet by 23, 24, the staffing industry really has struggled the last 2 years. And what's become plain is, of course, we've had, I think it was like 8.5 million sort of documented and, basically documented, undocumented workers coming into the United States. You start putting that in perspective, and it's like,
Wow.
you just added 2.5% to the American population in 4 years, of which, I'm sure the vast majority are working and are basically competing against a lot of what our workers do. And so you have all these dynamics, and I go through that trip down memory lane just to say, this has been one of the most dynamic, and when I say dynamic, I don't necessarily mean good, but changing workforce periods that I've experienced in 34 years in the business. I've never, it's like to have to adjust to that. So I do feel privileged to sort of be on the front lines and seeing how that, impacts real people, both from the employee standpoint and from the employer standpoint. And frankly, though, I think we're just getting started. I think we're going into another period of, great change. And, how it ends up, I'm not sure, but there's a lot of change yet to come.
So part of this, is this accurate? People are returning to the office, right? Some of them by their choice, some of them maybe not by choice. Is that true?
Yeah, there's no question. And at this point, realistically, the vast majority who are coming back to the office aren't really doing it of their own volition. But each week you see another example of another large company bringing their employees back, back into the office. And, you know, the which begs any number of questions. But again, these are iconic names that are bringing, again, that are bringing people back into the office. Of course, the Mac Daddy of them all is happening right before our very eyes in, Washington, D.C. and really across the United States is, is the federal government requiring people to come back into the office, which, which we did HireQuest did a study back in about 6 months ago. And by far, the state with you can't call it a state because it's a district, but the District of Columbia had far and away the largest percentage of remote workers in the United States. And of course, that script is about to flip, and which is going to have massive implications.
Do you have a feel for why? I mean, what they're trying to achieve with that move? Or I guess there's got to be some pros and some cons, or some reasons behind, hey, this is why we're doing this.
So, that's a good question, and there's really, in some respects, there's more than one answer to it. Part of what they're recognizing, what meaning the current administration, is attempting to achieve, frankly, is different than what a typical company would want to be trying to achieve. I mean, the stated objective is to get people to resign. So forcing somebody who's, basically been out of the office for 5 years to come back, they're banking on a large percentage of the people to not return. Keep in perspective, even as you look at, for example, in essence, eliminating most of the contractors and eliminating the positions for people who are on probation. The new administration clearly is looking to, it has a stated objective to reduce the federal workforce by 10%. Well, those moves plus the voluntary, if you get a paycheck to the end of the year, if you agree to resign, you take those three together. Right now, it's still only showing maybe, 5% of the workforce that's affected. And if your goal is 10%, well, okay, how do you bridge that how do you bridge that extra 5%? Well, one of the ways is you take people who've been, working from home, and you say, now you have to show up. And it's designed to get people, to leave. It's not being done in a way that, let's say, somebody like, a Goldman Sachs would do it, because it's really being done pretty much, indiscriminately. That said, for observers like yourself and employers like myself, it will give us a lot of sort of insights into, how many people are actually willing to come back into the office under, I'll say, the worst of circumstances, right? It's like, it's not sort of, hey, a year from now, you're going to need to come back. And, but if you really have a good reason, maybe we'll work with you. I mean, there's not a lot of that. It's just sort of like, hey, we've got 95% vacancies in downtown DC. You need to start filling that office or you're gone. It doesn't matter if you've got, top marks on your performance review, you just need to show up. So what I'm saying again is it's designed to be, in essence, to encourage a person to quit.
Well, it sounds to me like that objective will probably be reached. Sounds like that's probably going to work. But what I'm seeing on the positive side, for me being selfish, I wonder if that's not going to free up some talent for people like me that have opportunities for people to work remotely. I guess yeah.
Yeah. So and that's that's where a lot of this will be again, very instructive
Yeah.
is what happens with productivity, and those are things that haven't been really as well understood as what they probably should be. And part of our study, the interesting thing that it showed, for example, is, and particularly among younger workers, love to work remote, want to work remote,
Mhm.
but and self-reporting say they're more productive. And yet you have other studies that show people, and especially younger people, being less productive. And so you have all this conflicting data out there. And so, again, this will be a really good test case of, of how that works and how that doesn't work. And look, I mean, I think that one of the biggest issues is, and again, hopefully it'll get employers to look at it, sort of to your point, as far as, hey, you know, I kind of like working remote. And I can do it. And candidly, I've worked remote for 24 years myself.
Hmm.
So so I mean, I see the value in remote work, uh, as well. The issue is more, but is it appropriate for everybody? And those are things where now we're about to receive a bunch of, again, a bunch of data as to, we'll see whether the productivity, um, really works out, whether it really works out or not. I think the other thing, this is a little bit of a tangent. I think the other part that where this might expose, and you've seen certain tech companies they started picking up on this 2 years ago, the federal government, not as much, is how many people are still collecting, premium pay for quote unquote working in DC, but actually moved 4 years ago to Ohio or Nebraska, and
Right.
yet are still collecting that pay differential, which is fraud.
Right. So, just switching up a little bit, are you seeing a rise at all in interest among younger people entering the workforce in the trades, in the skilled trades? Are you seeing that too?
So I love that question, and frankly, HireQuest is a big advocate of of that. Obviously, part of it's selfish, but when you look at the average age of tradesmen like plumbers and electricians and masons, it skews very old. And there was a
Right.
generation that was constantly, it was for good reason drummed into my head as a kid. You should go to college. You should go to college.
Yeah.
And it always, it generally, it paid off. But we've come to this point where we're pushing people, into it that aren't necessarily prepared. They run up a bunch of debts to go to school for a year and a half, and then they're saddled with those debts, but they never really were meant to be, really were meant, really college really shouldn't have really been for them, wasn't for them. And on top of it is that, or it's like, how there are certain degrees where it's like, you know, how many of certain degrees do we really need? And, and so, you know, we're, I think the public school system is lagging. I think that, back when I was in junior high, I had to take woodworking, I had to take
Yeah.
class, I had to do all these shop classes. So at the very least, and then worked for my father construction. So when I graduated from high school, I knew what it was I knew what it was like to work on a work site. I knew what it was like to use a bandsaw to cut wood, and, unfortunately, I really would love to see more schools actually offer it. I happen to live in Pinellas County, Florida, and one of the things that our public school system is actually a little bit ahead of the game is does have some, sort of skills academies. And
Oh,
and
good.
frankly, I think every major school district ought to have those to help, to help uh sort of grease the skids for more people to do it because look, an electrician, somebody could come out of high school at 18, work for a year as an electrician's helper, then spend a few years going through an apprenticeship. By the time they're 28, 29, they can easily be making $80 to $100,000 a year. And, I would argue that there are very few college degrees that you're going to end up in that same spot.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll just share with you my best friend growing up. I went to college. My folks had terminal degrees. It was never a question. And my buddy Kirk, he went in the air conditioning business, and he can buy and sell me 3 times over, Rick. He's done real well for himself.
It's exactly right. And I certainly, I certainly hope that message gets through to more and more people. That unfortunately, you know, universities are a big business as well, and so there's a lot of competition to encourage people to continue to pursue degrees. And in some cases, it obviously is the right call, right?
Yeah.
It certainly is the right call, but golly, it's like they're so. Your point is exactly apropos. I mean, there is a shortage of tradespeople out there, plain and simple. And even say some of the and obviously not everybody has what it takes to be, an electrician. I mean, electricians, that requires, that requires a lot of smarts.
Yeah.
But there are even beneath that, let's say beneath that category, there are a lot of sub-professionals in the construction industry as well that are in short supply. I mean, I'll say, and let's just say if you use dollars paid, obviously as a proxy for what the market values a person's skills, let's say commercial painters their skills not valued, let's say the way an electrician is. And yet, if you're a good painter and you can round up 3 or 4 of your, 3 or 4 people that are good painters besides you, to your point, you're going to probably be able to retire when you're 50 years old.
Right. You have such a marvelous vantage point to see trends, things that are happening in such a variety of industries. I'm curious, what are you seeing or noticing about AI? It started to enter my world a little bit. I hit a button before we came onto our Zoom room where we're doing this interview, and it's going to, we'll see, but I think it's going to take notes and give me a summary of our conversation. And all I did was click a button.
It's pretty amazing. The types of, I'll call them menial functions. They're not necessarily menial. That's not really the word I'm looking for, but the repetitive functions that machine learning can handle, right? And to address your point, if you think about it, and you go back 40 years ago, if you thought of a staffing company, what you mostly thought of was sort of like what was the old movie, Dolly Parton and Lily Tom, 9 to 5,
yeah.
right? And it's like you're working as a temp, right? And what did you think of as a temp 40 years ago? You thought of a secretary. But how many true secretaries even exist anymore? So, and obviously AI is is a quantum leap ahead of even some of the basic technology that's been employed. But think of how many jobs have been replaced by voicemail. And so in staffing, what you see is all of a sudden the staffing industry, the largest component used to be placement of temporary, I'll call them secretaries, right? Obviously, there's a lot more in it than that, but they were basically clerical workers is probably a better way of putting it. There was half the industry probably was clerical workers. Clerical workers are that's almost vanished. And that you bring up a great point with AI, and I think AI has the potential. It's going to transform our society. It has the opportunity, but it has the opportunity to have a very positive impact, and has the opportunity to be a very negative impact. Our policymakers are going to have to get out ahead of this, I think, and I fear, because if you if you think of the greatest periods of revolution, it was really right after the Industrial Revolution, and you had all the people who had to move from the farm, into the city, and people who were, sort of had a normal, what was then in the 1720s a normal life, were all of a sudden thrust into big cities and trying to work on some machine. To the extent that AI fully develops, there are a lot of, I'll just use one example. And look, there's probably a lot more tech, and infrastructure that needs to take place for this to take place, to fully take place. But let's say we do get to the point of driverless trucks. There's 5 million Americans that work as truck drivers. Where are they going to work after? What are they going to, what are they going to do? And so, there's, and yet on the other hand, we import far more than what we export. To the extent that we can eliminate, let's say, cost differences, why would we be manufacturing, let's say, anything in Malaysia or Vietnam if we have AI applied in major doses on our factory floor, but we can produce all the stuff here. So that's great. I mean, so that's more.
Right.
But then it's all the, and what's the timing of that going to be, though? Are we going to get more manufacturing here before all of our truck drivers become unemployed? Or are all our truck drivers going to be looking around waiting? And so you just start, when you think about the timing of that, those are major, major implications. And I don't know if we as Americans have really started even thinking quite enough. You look at some of it and you say, wow, that's cool. Like you said, it's like, hey, they're transcribing, some machine is transcribing all of this. I read an article in the National Geographic a couple months ago about like what AI is doing to forecast earthquakes, to read ancient scrolls that are rolled together, and if you unrolled them, it would fall apart. And they're predicting what the next sound a whale will make. These different things, they're all cool, right? But you start thinking about it, but they're also going to take, the jobs of a lot of people. And that brings back reshoring and new, and manufacturing comes back to the United States. That's great. But what's the timing of it?
I was going to quote, may you live in interesting times. Somebody smart and witty said that a long time ago, I think. We certainly are, aren't we?
Well, I've heard that before. And as I recall, it's actually meant to be a curse.
Oh. So in a local HireQuest office, paint us a picture of the day-to-day. What's going on in that office? What are HireQuest folks doing on a daily basis to navigate all this?
So, I appreciate you asking that, in part realizing HireQuest has several major divisions. So
okay.
One of the divisions that we have is HireQuest Direct. So HireQuest Direct is your classic, basically direct dispatch labor company. So 85% of our workers are, 85% of our workers are working construction.
Okay.
And so we'll have a person who, the office will open at 5:30 in the morning, and then we'll assign workers and we'll get them transportation to the job site. They'll work that day and their pay card will be full of money that night. And so we have another person who takes care of that. A lot of that, and so we're seeing, you can tell really quickly what's going on. We have great insights from construction, because of that. We're also very much sensitive in that to fluctuating demands. And so we get good intel as to, how easier it is or isn't, for, for, let's say, for projects. And because what you start seeing is if the economy is starting to falter a bit, they won't use us as heavily. And and yet we're great for supplementing in a very short range situation. Our next large, another large division we have is selling, which is more your traditional, staffing. And again, so we're we're working with all sorts of companies with that, the residual clerical workers that are still out there. But a lot of it is related to, a lot of that business is related to, again, long-term assignments in factories. Think of forklift drivers. But also, we do a lot of, let's say, like, um, even like medical assistants and things like that. A number of our offices will supply people like that. So we have a broad range of clients. And so an office like that would have the manager and typically, a person to do payroll and 2 or 3 people who are recruiting. And so they're just going out and they're finding, based on what the client's needs are, they're going out and talking to people. And again, we get great insight really as to whether or not there's going to be wage inflation because, you'll get a client who maybe you'll be sitting there saying, well, we want to pay $16 an hour. And if, we'll know whether or not we can fill that, order at $16 an hour, and we can kind of get with our clients and say, hey, that's just, $16 ain't going to do it. Your competition's all paying 18 or, so we've got great insight that way. But then we have another division, the MRI network, which is one of the oldest network of recruiting companies. We have about 180 franchisees across the globe that are placing high-level people. So you could think of a CFO. We do CEOs. We'll do, we have some that do doctors. We have nurses, et cetera. And again, so we have and again, so we're seeing it from both the candidate side and from the client side. And we get just, and so we're a wealth of information for our clients and for our candidates, because then we see over the entire globe, hey, are engineers in high demand or are they not in high demand? Can you, and so, so we get a lot of insights. We just get a lot of insights into that stuff. And, again, our offices vary. We have certain offices that have 40 recruiters in them. And we have some they have one person who's sort of at the end of their career. They know a bunch of people in their industry and say, hey, I can make $35,000 a year, a placement, helping my friends find jobs, and they become a franchisee of it.
Well, as an employer, and I'm not a big employer, but I can certainly have that hat on for a moment. This strikes me as one of those areas where if I don't take advantage of your specialized knowledge and expertise, because you're out there, you're in it, you have so much data coming in, real world data. If I don't take advantage of that, I'm operating in the dark. I could be shooting myself in the foot, and it could be very costly in a hurry, couldn't it?
Well, I think in particularly, it's particularly now with as many remote workers as there are, for example. And one of the beauties of remote, kind of going back to that a little bit, is think of it this way. Let's say you're trying to bring in a marketing person. It doesn't matter for you realistically. It shouldn't matter to you. That person could be in LA, that person could be in Maine, that person could be in Seattle, or it could be sitting one door down from you. What difference does it make, really? What he or she does is almost, saying it's irrelevant to where they're working. But how are you going to seriously, how are you going to recruit that person? Whereas if you go to somebody who's placing 50 marketing people a year, they're going to have, within 3 days, you're going to have 5 vetted resumes on your desk. And all that's work, that, hiring the wrong person, can be a disaster for your business.
Yes, I've learned that lesson, and I've also learned that I make all the mistakes. I have a tendency to hire in my own image, and every mistake someone could make on every aspect of that. I've got the scar tissue to prove it, and I bet I'm not the only one.
So I'd like to turn that around and ask you the question.
Yes, sir.
Do you find over the time, and obviously I'm sure you have some that you hired in your own image that, sort of like, wait, we can't have two of these. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
There's not enough room in this town for the two of us. On the other hand, overall, have you found that that's better for you or worse for you if you have a person that's more like you?
Oh, absolutely worse in my case. It
Okay.
absolutely no. I need people that can fill all the gaps because I've got this one little tiny, circle of superpower, and it's pretty darn small. And I need to stay in my lane and do that, and then that whole big world of things. And so, no, I tremendously value everything you're saying, and I'm learning a lot in this conversation. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that as yours as well. Part of it, it's kind of funny is that, it's great that you have that introspection as well, though, that you can look, look at yourself and say, hey, I need to fill in those gaps. I think it's one of the most important parts of leadership is being able to say, you know what, I'm really good at, maybe I'm really decisive and I can look at numbers and process the information quickly, but I'm so harsh, nobody likes me. You know what I'm saying? Like you could be those different things. You follow me?
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, if then I need somebody warm and fuzzy around me, or I'm just gonna tick everybody off and end up with, nobody who sticks around. Or maybe I'm a marshmallow and I hate firing people, but an organization can't just keep lousy people either.
That's right. Hey, listen, before we wrap, I'd love to leave our listeners with a pro tip. The tagline for the show is producing better results in less time. Let's share a pro tip with and it can be people hiring, people looking, just general life lesson in general, but something that'll give them something to chew on for producing better results in less time because you've clearly done it.
Well, I will tell you, I'll give two, frankly, if that's okay.
Sure.
One of the first ones, and I learned this, and frankly, it changed my life. I learned this back. I was, very, very new in my career, but I keep and have kept for 30, nearly, for 40 years almost now, a to-do list. I keep my to-do list because otherwise things rattle around in my mind and then I forget and then it'll stress you out because it's like, you'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, oh, son of a gun, I forgot to call so-and-so or whatever it is. But I just keep track of it so that then I don't worry about that. I'm not going to get things done. And anybody who knows me realizes I follow up on stuff. I follow up on stuff because I have it recorded. And the people who I supervise, I pretty much have a list for them as well. So I don't typically forget what I've told them to do and I can hold them more accountable. That would be one of them but it's important to write it down. No one has a good enough, and writing down, obviously you can write it down electronically, but I mean,
Yeah.
the point is keeping track of it is crucial. And it's crucial for your own sanity, because you've often find otherwise that, like I said, you just don't, you'll just keep worrying about it. The other part, and this isn't my term for it, and it isn't my idea, but it's something that I have found to be extraordinarily helpful in my, in my life, but also then in my work and it's from the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. And it's in there's a lot of good stuff in it, but in particular, there's a thing called habit stacking. And so one of the things that I'm very intentional about is, we all have, probably literally 100,000 tasks that we complete in a day. And then a lot of them we have to do. Some we just do because we like it, but some we try to avoid, but we don't always do them. We don't always do them efficiently. And so with habit stacking, it's kind of like, well, okay, I'll go in I'll just use this as an example is that when I go to brush my teeth in the morning, well, then maybe I'll charge my Apple Watch at the same time that then I feed the dog. And when I'm heating up my coffee, I feed the fish. I just completed like 6 tasks all in the space of 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But do it each time and then you don't forget it, to where it's all of a sudden it's like, oh, I forgot to feed Fido this morning. And not that Fido would let you, that's probably a bad example, but then you really don't forget things, and you manage to do all the mundane things that can throw you off track. And of course, you can do it on the work, again, on the work, at a work level as well, where it's kind of like, well, okay, while I'm checking my emails, then I'll also, I'll do this or that at some point. That's always dead time. And I have found that to be very helpful in allowing me to be, more productive. And and I'm going to add a third one in for nothing. And part of it is not to let stuff sit around either. And part of it's with the to-do list, but it's like, realistically, things don't get better with age. Just because you ignore doing something doesn't mean that you're not going to end up having to do it. And I still do it from time to time. And it drives me crazy. Like, I use a really stupid example. I'll sit there and it's like, okay, my fingernails are getting a little bit long. I need to cut them. But instead of walking 20 feet over to the bathroom and clipping my nails, I'll sit there and I'll do it later. And then 2 hours later, it's like, I really need to cut my nails. You know what I'm saying? And you just keep going back and forth.
Right.
It's like, hey, dummy, just do it. And then it's done. And then you're not wasting mental energy, and, you're not wasting mental energy on something that is really colossally stupid. And, and that's sort of a bit of a silly example, but there's a lot of things from a business standpoint where all you end up doing is annoying your colleagues by not handling something that needs to be handled. And they may not like how you handle it, and you may not like having to deliver that message, but it's still not going to get better. You're still going to have to do it. The question is, and half the time, then you stress yourself out while you're thinking, oh gosh, they're going to hate that message. It's like, yeah, they're going to hate it 3 days from now, just as much as they'll hate it 3 minutes from now. Get it done with.
I am so glad I asked. That sounds like marvelous counsel to me. What's the best way for our listeners to tap into the work that's going on at HireQuest? Is there a website or something? What's the best way for them to stay connected?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are on, we're at HireQuest.com, www.HireQuest, HireQuest.com. And that has links to all of our different offices and our different brands. And, or if you're looking for anything even more, our corporate headquarters is in Goose Creek, South Carolina, and that's 843-723-7400. But probably the website is the best. Again, HireQuest.com.
Rick, it has been an absolute delight visiting with you this afternoon. Thank you for everything that you and your team are doing. You're clearly having a real impact on something that is so important to all of us, and we sure appreciate you, man.
Thank you, Stone. Have a good day.
My pleasure. All right, until next time, this is Stone Payton for our guest today, Rick Hermanns with HireQuest Inc., and everyone here at the Business RadioX family saying we'll see you in the fast lane.